Chapter 28. Good Doctor. Renoir checked his pocket watch. Just before it struck 7 a.m., he snapped it shut. Bien. The sun is risen. There was a palpable sense of relief in the room. A tension wire snipped. James let out an embarrassed laugh. All eyes in the room turned to him and he blushed. I'm sorry. I knew what you were saying, but for a second it sounded like you were a preacher. The sun has risen. Renoir allowed a half smile. Durant had the map spread out on the floor. Strothman and Halstead looked over it intently, examining the possible avenues that would take them to Verdun. Renoir joined them. He smoothed his moustache as he took in the lay of the land. I think we must avoid cities. Everything that dies comes again, so everyone they kill builds their army. Strothman closed his eyes. Vancine. Oui, said Renoir. Durant glanced at him. Renoir translated. He says, insanity. Halstead chewed on a match. Too right there, mate. Too bloody right. Renoir traced a line on the map. If we travel toward the Belgian frontier, skirting Saint-Quentin and to the south of Cambrai, we can enter the Ardennes forest. From there, he pointed to a thin blue line that twisted in gentle turns running south to Verdun. We can follow the Meuse, perhaps find a vessel to run the river, all the way to Fort Douaumont and Verdun. Halstead let out a frustrated sigh. Or we could head directly north and try for the coast. And what then? Asked Renoir. Sail to bleeding Australia. You were a sailor? No, mate, but I'll make a top-flight passenger. Look, gentlemen, I don't see an endgame here. As it is, we might as well hunker in this cellar until things clear. Until things clear? Asked Caitlin. Halstead took a breath before he spoke. I've been chasing this around in my brain all night. If there's something biblical, like Noah and his bleeding flood, like Passover for the Yids, right? If it's that, then it'll run its course, like a fever, and be done. We sit right here, scavenge what we need during the day, seal up tight at night, snug as a bug, and wait it out. Renoir combed his moustache absently. Perhaps. But 40 days and 40 nights in this room. If we are not already, we will all be insane. Well, mate, your bloody idea is one for the books. We're going to camp in some random field at night and pray there's not a dead body roaming about nearby. Fucking hell, that's insane, mate. That is insane. Strothman cleared his throat. I think there is another way. All eyes turned in his direction. Strothman continued. Our army has begun a strategic withdrawal. That is why my machine gun squad held the line. The first guards were in retreat. For 6 months we have been constructing the Siegfriedstellung. Poured concrete bunkers and fortifications, concrete tunnels 30 feet below the ground. It runs from Arras almost to Reims. The maneuver was intended to allow us time to prepare an offensive for the late summer. All infrastructure, towns, railways, bridges have been destroyed to stymie your advance. James smirked. Dang, you're just giving away the whole story, ain't you? Strothman's smile was tinged with irony. The store has burnt down. I am happy to give away the ashes. Durant looked at the map. How far? Not far. 25 kilometer, perhaps 30? No more? Said Strothman. They all chewed it over for a moment. Strothman looked around the room. Kameraden, this is the best choice. There has been no combat there. Not a single village stands between here and the fortifications. They've all been evacuated and burned to the ground 6 weeks past. There should be few dead to rise, and there are no population centers. It is possible that there will be survivors in the fort itself, but if that is so, they will welcome us, I'm sure. There will be food stocks, equipment, everything we could want, and no need to scavenge. Perhaps a better place to weather the flood than Verdun. Halstead was resolved. I'd just as soon plant myself right here in this ark and see if she's seaworthy. Strothman mulled it over a moment before he spoke. Then this is where I will part your company. I cannot stay in France. I must make my way home, see if my family has survived. Durant turned to Halstead. Doctor, if you want to stay here, that's fine. I'm still going to try for Verdun. I'm game to head for the captain's fort first and then go south from there. Everyone else can make their own decisions. Isaiah looked to Renoir. Renoir shrugged. Staying here is not for me. Isaiah was in pure agreement. Yeah, I ain't staying in no slave quarters longer than absolutely necessary. I'll walk along with you. What do you say, Deputy? Francois' mind had been elsewhere. He snapped back to the present. No, I will go. Caitlin nodded her acceptance too. James piped up. Me and Jonah are going to come too. Jonah, for his part, had no idea what the debate was, so he shrugged his shoulders amiably. Strothman translated. Wir werden sie zum Siegfried stellen. We will take them to the Siegfried line. Jonah's eyebrows raised, then he nodded. Ja, gut. Durant looked at Halstead, who was plainly in disagreement, and plainly in need of a cigarette. Fuck! Burst out of him. He shook his head bitterly. Fucking hell. Fine, if we're going, let's bloody well fucking go. Renoir forced the cellar doors open and found them waiting. There were barely a dozen of them, an admixture of the armies, all silent, dead, cocooned in the dawn's light. Caitlin stepped over the body of a German major whose head of hair was slicked back with dried blood. An involuntary shiver of terror ran down her spine, though she could not say why. They moved east with haste, leaving the Chateau de Bois, her orchards, and the fallen with fresh legs, buoyed by the idea that they might only have to travel 30 kilometers to Sanctuary instead of 300. The clean air of the outdoors was a relief after a day and a half underground, but the sun that greeted them when they began their march began to fade as storm clouds pushed west in their direction. By 8:30 a.m., the bright blue had been replaced with a blank grey slate, matching their dampening spirits. The landscape around them seemed to echo the weather, going from fruitful fields to burned-out buildings and scorched earth. At noon on Sunday, Rupert awakened to find Paul Becker standing over him. Becker wore a fresh uniform and had given up an hour of sleep to shave and get himself somewhat clear of the mud and grime. Wake up, get clean. We march in an hour. Yes, sir. Rupert struggled to standing and got his bearings in the trenches. If this was Berliner Strasse Trench, the place he'd been currently calling home was about 50 meters north. He bustled through the zigzagging trenches toward his dugout. The emptiness and silence were bizarre. As he walked, he realized that there was no sound, no distant rattle of MGs, no shells plaintively screaming, none of the occasional sniper fire which he usually tuned out. And by this point he was fully aware that if you heard the shot, it could not be the one that killed you. but there had been no shots fired, period, and the usual steady rumbling of distant artillery had gone silent. Had an armistice been signed while they were underground? Had the workers of the world fulfilled their promise to stop building bombs and guns so that the war would grind to a halt? Rupert darkened at the thought, knowing if that happened, the brass in Berlin would tell the generals to do it with sticks and bricks and stones. And yet, an honest-to-God ceasefire and peace talks were not out of the question. As he washed and shaved in his dugout, he fantasized about this being his last day at war. Buttoning his blouse and uniform was a fumbling, painful affair. Cleaning his tattered fingers had them bleeding again, and each button was a study in screaming nerve endings. But somehow he got the job done. As he left his dugout, he had the thought that perhaps there was some iodine in the medical station that he might use on his poor fingers. If the war was indeed over, getting them infected and amputated would be an extraordinary shame. He lit a lamp and entered the dugout. When he saw what was awaiting him, he regretted not just letting his fingers rot and fall off. Herr Dr. München was just sitting there. He'd been tortured and decapitated. His small manhood had been cut from him. It now hung from his open mouth. His head was cradled in his lap by hands that had been likewise severed from his body. Rupert assumed that they were Dr. München's hands. He could not say for sure. Likewise, the legs had been amputated at the knee. All that was left of them were neatly stacked sets of fibulas and tibias, and two little piles of metatarsals and phalanges, cuneiforms and cuboids, plus the larger hind foot bones. All had been stripped of meat. Rupert saw all of it in the first flash of the kerosene lamp, and the image burned into his brain to stay, a permanent fixture like some sadist's tintype. Potentially gangrene fingers be damned, he stumbled back into the sunlit trenches empty-handed and ran all the way back to Berliner Strasse trench, where he found Becker and the others preparing to march. When he was able to spit out what he had seen, the entire squad followed the trenches back to Dr. München's remains. It was just as Rupert had described, and it left them all a bit shaken. They'd all seen and been the cause of plenty of innards becoming outards since 1914. But this was something different. It made them ashamed. It made them angry. It made them want to kill the British who must have done this to this innocent man, a doctor, no less. And they swore to each other that they would exact righteous vengeance for this crime. They could not have known that the British did not do this. They could not have known that Dr. München was no innocent. They could not have known that he had cured female patients of their hysteria by putting them under anesthesia and having sex willy-nilly with them. They could have not have known that this was the price he had to pay for his crimes. His bill had come due, and this was not torture. This was comeuppance, a recompense, his personal reckoning of sorts. Regardless, a command decision had to be made and definitive action taken. Paul Becker mulled it over and drew the same conclusion that Wolfgang Strothmann had. It did not explain the lack of crackling gunfire or artillery barrage, but the empty trenches could only mean that the planned withdrawal to the Siegfried Line had been abruptly accelerated. It also did not explain why the Tommies had not pushed forward and taken the vacant German trenches, but he decided it was best to leave that for another day. Who knew? Maybe the British were on the way right now, and if that was the case, Becker did not intend to surrender or stand alone against them, despite the desire for just vengeance in regard to good old Dr. München's vivisections. Remember, the doctor would have to wait its day to be a mob-unifying battle cry. Paul Becker marshaled his men and with all haste they started east toward the freshly built German fortifications that awaited them.